Hey guys, I'm going to be running you through the Pilot Tip Screws. Now the easiest way to show you why these are good is I'll run you through a few different screw types and then we'll talk about some of the properties of them and then we'll show you what we've done to make the Pilot Tip screw work. In essence, the Pilot Tip screw, it's really easy to install and it holds on for a really long time. So that, in a nutshell, that's it. So we'll look at a roofing screw first. So roofing screws, they'll have a variety of, there's a few different tips that they've got on them, self-cutting tips. Some of them have got like sort of a needle point with a slash through it. Some of them have got like this one, like a drill point on the end. So these work really well because that tip down there cuts a wonderful hole through the roof sheet, which is great. And then it obviously bores into the batten, timber batten underneath. Now, uh, what you'll find is that the head, the cutting tip on those screws, the diameter there, is typically about the same size as the shaft. Sometimes it's even a little bit bigger, but typically it's about the same size or thereabouts, which um, which is fine because it makes a clearance hole for that screw through that roof sheet. Now, when it goes into the timber, the threads are obviously really holding onto the timber really strongly, but one of the things that happens is, as it bores that hole, sometimes a hole in that roof sheet, it's not like a super snug fit on the diameter of the shaft there. It's not loose as such, but it's not like super duper tight. Now that's okay for a roofing screw because it only has to, it's just pulling the roof sheet down. All the holding is going on in the timber batten, so it's got all the meat from that timber to hold on it. And you can see this arrow here, which I've drawn. You can see a tiny bit of clearance up the top there. Now that's exaggerated, but what happens is it's not like a super tight fit. So that's a roofing screw. Works beautiful for roofing screws, less so for gutter mesh. If I go to a tech screw, so these are used for self-tapping into metal as well. One of the challenges though with um, with a roof, it's only 0.42 millimeters thick. I know there's a few different grades, but it's sub 0.5 millimeters typically. Now, tech screws, they've got an awesome self-cutting tip on them as well, which works great. But what will happen typically is the diameter of that head is normally a bit bigger actually than the shaft of the screw. So what happens is boring a hole through that roof sheet, but the downside is that you can see there, we've exaggerated it for the video just a little bit, but you can see that you end up with a little bit of air time in between the diameter of the screw, like the shaft diameter, like this diameter of the screw, and the roof sheet. So the threads are holding it into place, but it's sort of not like a really tight fit on there. Now, they can work okay, but over time, with the expansion of the roof sheet, you don't want that moving. So that's one of the downsides of the standard tech screw for gutter mesh installation is that it's boring a bigger hole through the roof sheet, so it's not like super duper retained for the long term anyway. Now, this is our old needlepoint screw. We stuck with it for ages because it's got this, it's got this tapered shape to it. Now what happens is that that'll pierce into the roof sheet and then it'll swage its way into place. So you get like a super duper tight retention. And you can see there, and we've exaggerated it a little bit for the video, of course. But you can see there, because it's tapered all the way, you can imagine as that screw's coming in, it's really reaming a hole in that roof sheet and really swaging its way into place. Super tight fit in there. So the idea is it's got to stay in there for a long time, right? Indefinitely. So we wanted it to be a super tight fit. So under expansion, contraction of the roof sheet, it's always in there. It's always sort of sealed up and holding well. And that was the important part with the needlepoint screw. Downside, no self-cutting tip. So it was a little bit harder to install compared to a Tek screw. So that took us to, how do we make this better? And we pretty much combine a few elements. We've got, most importantly, we've got, whoops, most importantly, we've got a cutting tip on the end, and then that tapers out over the rest of the screw. So that cutting tip down there, that diameter, really, really small. As small as we could make it from a manufacturing point of view. It's the smallest that we could make it to sort of do the job that it needed to do. Still be strong enough to pierce a hole through the roof sheet, but small enough that it only creates a tiny, tiny pilot hole in the roof sheet before the rest of the screw. I should stop drawing on there. Before the rest of the screw here can swage its way in. So it's essentially getting the small tip of a Tek screw and then putting it on the end of a needlepoint screw so that it makes it easy to bore in because it's got that self-cutting tip, but because the rest of the screw is still going outwards all the way up until the head of the screw, it means that it's always swaging its way into place the whole time. So the pilot tip screw, super easy to install because it's got that self-cutting tip, but it's still got really, really good retention because it's got that tapered shape all the way up the body of the screw. And that's that's the secret sauce, is combining those two elements. So yeah, easy to install, really good retention for the long term, and that's what makes the pilot tip screw.